Welcome to Recalculating Small Business.
My co-host, Dan Perkins, is on assignment, but we are fortunate today to have Annalisa Parent, who's Chief Executive of Laurel Elite Books. She's here to talk about why a small business should create a book and what do you do after a book. Annalisa, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me, Don. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
Well, Anna, before we go further, tell us a little bit about your background. You just said that you live mostly in Vermont, but give us a little bit of your background.
Sure. So I'm a storyteller from way back, and it's my mission to help other people tell their stories and tell them well. So in this case, what I'm helping business owners to do is to get their message out into the world and share that with others, because they've got solutions to problems, and there are people out there who need to hear that. And that's really my passion. That's my mission, is to help that message to get out. You know, we all have in the core of our being something really important to say, but we don't always know how to get it out. And I love being there for those light bulb aha moments when people find their message and the way to say it.
Well, you know, I've been in the publishing business now almost 50 years, and one thing I learned early was that everybody has at least one book in him or herself. But why is it important for a small business owner or a leader to create a book, and what's equally as important, to have the fortitude to, as you and I both know, it takes a lot to do a book. But first, let's start with the idea. Why should a small business owner create a book?
Well, I believe in it sort of like a time machine, Don. Like this book is getting your message out all day, every day, regardless of the time zone. You don't have to be there, but you're starting a conversation with somebody who might be someone that you can help. And that person can become a potential client. So there's a mission there in working to help people. And there's also, you know, in order to stay in business, we need to have clients. So there are potential people who can become your clients. And that book is that intermediary at all times, every day, even while you're sleeping, starting that conversation with the people who are ideal to work with you.
Well, as you know, writing a book is not an easy task. People think it's easy. How do you go about? Someone comes to you and says, "Annalisa, I'm thinking of doing a book." What are the first things you ask them? Let's go from there.
Sure. Well, the first thing that they need is expertise. And it's not just academic expertise about a topic. It's experiential. So they have experience helping people to solve that problem. And they can draw on those case studies to be able to talk about how they help people. So that's the most important thing for the expertise. And once the person has established that they have that, it's a matter of putting together their message. So you may or may not know this, Don, but 50%, greater than 50% of the books that are purchased are not actually read. So we keep that in mind when we're thinking about starting that client conversation. And when we create books, we're thinking about engaging the potential reader, the potential client, regardless of where the person interfaces with the book. So even if they never read it, if they just look at the front and the back cover, we want the entrepreneur, the small business owner, to be memorable. If they open up to page 217, we want that content to be visually compelling. We want it to be interesting. We want the reader to continue on to page 218 because 217 was interesting. In other words, it doesn't start on page 1. Every page needs to be engaging to get that reader as a potential client, starting that conversation.
Well, we can go in a lot of directions, but first let's start. Um, I'm a business owner. I create widgets, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm the best widget maker in the world. I don't, what I want to do is get other people to know that. What are some of the things you ask us, that widget construction person? What do you ask them about widget making that you then can put together into a book?
That's a really good question because I think one of the places where would-be writers get stuck is that they think that it's about the widgets. And we could write a book about widgets, and it might be interesting, especially to other people who love widgets, but that's not really the point. The point is, what is the purpose of the widget? So whatever these objects are, they're helping somebody to do something, whether it's to be healthier or to be happier, whatever it is that the problem the widget solves, that's where we need to dig into. And we really need to talk about who is this client who wants to buy widgets and what is their problem. And then we can figure out how we're going to talk to them. And it isn't really a book about widgets. It's a book about the problem that the widgets solve. Does that make sense?
Oh, very much. On this program over the years, we've had a lot of people come on who have written books. The one that really impacted me was actually the son of the founder of AutoZone, who actually wrote a book about not AutoZone, but the fact that he had worked himself into literally a nervous breakdown. And what he had learned is how to balance life and work. And his was a very successful book. So I hear what you're saying. Sometimes you get somebody in there who has a different way of leading his managers or her managers. Oh, and by the way, let's stop right there and ask a question. I've noticed, and the Publishers Weekly picked up on this recently, that most of these books from entrepreneurs seem to be written by males. Their number was 71% of the new books issued in 2017 were written by men versus women. My question, I guess, to you is, do you get a lot of women entrepreneurs and owners asking to do books?
I do. That number actually surprises me because I haven't run statistics on our authors, but I would think that we're very close to 50%. Women like to share stories. I'm sure men like to share stories too, but, we have a reputation for the gift of gab, as the Irish say. And, I love working with female entrepreneurs. I think that they approach the storytelling about themselves and what they do in a very unique way.
Well, also, the interesting thing I found is that oftentimes they don't talk about how to be a better mommy but rather how to be a better business person. What I'm trying to do is engage. Our audience is made up of 59%, according to our studies, are presidents and/or owners of businesses. And I guess what I'm trying to find from you is what impels entrepreneurs to write books. Yes, you say it helps them build a business, but it takes a big leap of faith to go out there and write a book. What do you find are the reasons they do it?
Well, I'm in a unique niche to answer that question in that the books that we specialize in are those client conversation books. And that's certainly one reason that, a president, a CEO, a small business owner would write a book, is to increase their client base. That kind of book talks a lot about what they do, how they do it, why they do it. But the book that you were talking about by the son of the AutoZone founder, that would be a book that would speak to other business owners and talk about, as you say, the balance of life and work. And that's something that business owners need to know about, or a book about management. That's a different type of expertise. So that might be another reason to highlight expertise. And that really goes into your trust, likability, and relatability factors, right? That could be a kind of getting to know you book that highlights your expertise that isn't specifically what your business does, but it's about how to run a business, how to be a business owner. So I think there are a lot of reasons why business owners might write books, and many of them, in my experience, they want to give back. They've learned a lot. They have been through the school of hard knocks, and they want to share that knowledge with others who are on their way up.
We're talking with Annalisa Parent. She's Chief Executive Officer of Laurel Elite Books, and we're talking about writing a book to add to your company's promotion and growth. And I find it interesting. In the past, I've written books, and I've ghostwritten books at times, but I haven't written a book that goes to that. A chief executive comes to you, Annalise, and says, I want to write a book. And the idea is, as I said earlier, about a widget, but and you agree to do the book. What's the next step for the executive?
Sure. So we have two types of people who come to us. They're either, as you say, people who want to write a book, or they've already written a book and it's not selling. So I love starting with people at the beginning, because that's when we can really get into what I was talking about, where we're really making sure that every page has something to engage your potential reader. So we're going to work through that first draft in 8 weeks. We're going to put together a solid draft that talks about your why and your what and your how, really drawing in that potential client. And once we've got a draft, we will revise it, fix anything that needs to be fixed, and we move right into publication. So we publish the books for our authors. We do hard copies, we do ebooks, and we do audiobooks. Not everyone wants an audiobook, but they're pretty darn hot right now, so they should have an audiobook. And so we work into that production, getting out the hard copies, and then we move straight into the marketing and the selling and the distribution of that book. So it's a pretty quick process. Entrepreneurs, CEOs, presidents, these are busy people. They don't have a lot of time to move through, lots and lots of drafts and that kind of thing.
Wow, 8 weeks is a lightning time in the publishing business. Congratulations, that's really good. But is it 150? How many pages do you usually do, and how do you charge?
So we shoot for 200 pages. We've found that that's a pretty sweet spot for people to be able to deliver their message and for the reader to consume in a manageable amount of time. And we charge based on phase. So as I said, people generally come to us either at the beginning or they've already published and not sold. So we have 3 phases: the writing, the publishing, and the selling. And there are lots of things that we can add in there. So, for example, some people want to do their publicity as a do-it-yourself, and we help them to put together their marketing strategy and tactics. Other people want it done for them, and they'll work with our publishing house's publicist. So every package is really customized to what the writer wants and needs, but those are the 3 phases.
Well, let's talk about the title. Again, quoting Publishers Weekly, they had a recent article. The writer is, according to PW, the title is 70% of the success of the book. What do you say to that?
I say yes. We have this expression, you can't judge a book by its cover, and that's just bunk. We do judge books by their cover. And so not only the title, but the images, the color, the size, these are all factors that are subconscious in the minds of the readers, of the buyers, but they factor in largely. And titles are huge, right? If you think about the book Think and Grow Rich, fabulous title, right? Everybody wants to just think and grow rich. That wasn't the original title. The original title was something like 500 Ways to Do Something. I don't remember what it was, but it was a terrible title. And the book didn't sell at all. But once it was repackaged, and suddenly it took off, and it's still a bestseller today, even though, this book has been out for decades. So the title is really huge, and knowing what it is that your audience is looking for, how you can really stem into their needs, their wants, knowing that audience really well is important. And it's always okay to change your title. You can always tweak it, and that's one of the great things, as you probably know, Dawn, about the publishing industry today with print on demand. Creating a second or third or 18th edition is much, much easier than it was, even 20 years ago.
Well, can you tell our audience the difference? Print on demand, you and I know it, but that's a term that a lot of people still don't understand.
Yeah, so print on demand technology is absolutely amazing. It's what allows you to order a book online and receive it 2 days later. That book didn't exist 2 days ago. So when you order that book and it's a print-on-demand book, it is literally printed on demand. So the order comes through, and that printing press prints one copy of that book for you and ships it to your house. So back in the olden days, the old way of doing things is that you would have a large print run, several thousand books that would then be warehoused, and those will be shipped to you. Now, we still do things that way. Not all books are done print on demand. But with print on demand technology, you don't have the cost of buying 5,000 books, storing them in your garage, and having to ship them to every reader who wants to buy one. It's all taken care of for you by the print on demand printing press.
Do you try to get your clients' books into bookstores?
Absolutely. That's one of the huge ways that we sell books for our clients. And because we're set up as a traditional publishing house, we've got that distribution where we can get books into bookstores and libraries. And that gets them into signings and events and meeting potential readers, which are really important parts of having a book. Now, it's not right for every single author, but for the authors where it's appropriate, we definitely want to be getting them into bookstores, libraries, and into signings in those venues.
Again, we're talking to Annalisa Parent. She's CEO of Elite Publishing, because it's rare that I get a chance to talk to somebody in the publishing industry who has really thought out a new model. How did you come up with this model?
That's a really interesting question. No one's ever asked me that before. This particular model makes the most sense for the audience we serve, right? If we wanted to work with sci-fi writers or something, this wouldn't be the right model. But what entrepreneurs and business owners and CEOs, what they need is something that's going to really walk them through the process, that's going to do, some hand-holding as far as creating deadlines, telling people what it is that they need to write, helping them to figure out what are the bullet points that you're going to flesh out here. All of those are really important elements for the audience that we serve. And then they don't want to deal with, distribution or making lots of phone calls to get their book out into the world. They're too busy for that. So having those services available for them, having them taken care of, it serves our audience well. So I guess just listening to what it is that they need. Whenever they say, I don't want that do-it-yourself plan, what can you do for me? Okay, let's find a solution for that. And so it's just been years of listening. I hope I've listened well to the people who want to write books but just don't have time, and finding the very best solution that's going to cater to them. And that's why we're Laurel Elite, because it should be an elite service that's helping them to get their message out with some effort. It takes effort to write a book, but less effort than if they tried to do it by themselves or some other solution.
Well, how do you find how do your customers find you, or how do you find your clients?
So I speak all over the world at a lot of entrepreneur and business conferences, conventions, boot camps. So I meet a lot of people that way. And, there's a lot of word of mouth among entrepreneurs. And so I would say probably around 50% of the people who come to us heard about us through somebody else who is happy with what they got from us.
Well, we've been around for now almost 20 years, Small Business Digest and Recalculating, etc. And quite frankly, I hadn't run into you, and quite recently, I wish I had run into you 10 years ago when I did my books. But you own, and again, your website for our listeners, should they want to learn more?
Absolutely. It's Laurel, like a Roman wreath, laurelelite.com.
Spell it out for our audience, please. This is radio.
Yes. So it's L for lollipop, AUREL, E for elephant, LIT as in Tom, E for elephant.com.
Well, a link to your website will be on recalculating.biz tonight. I guess my next question is, if a book's not selling or not doing well, what are some of the things you do to push up its efforts?
Sure. So what we find when people come to us and talk about their books not selling well is that they've mixed up marketing tactics and marketing strategies. And I would say that this is 95% of the time, this is the problem. So they've done some things, right? They posted it to their Facebook or their Instagram or their Twitter. They wrote an article about themselves on LinkedIn, and they stopped there. They had some tactics. They had some things to do, but they didn't have the overarching strategy that was really targeting who is the audience for this book, where do they hang out, and how do I reach them. So when this is the case, we go back in, and rather than looking at tactics, we create a strategy so that we know that this book is going to be in front of the people who need it and want it in the places where they are at the times when they're there. So we find a huge success in that. Now, a marketing strategy needs constant tweaking. So we typically work with these people for a year, at least 6 months, but typically a year, to really get that book out there. And we've found that, once we give it that kickstart, the momentum builds and it sells well afterwards.
That's really interesting. But now let's talk about pricing. Do your clients expect to make their money back, or do they view this as a loss leader?
Well, there are two answers to that question. Our bestseller has currently crossed the line of 500,000 books. Now, clearly, he has made his money back and then some. So when we talk about the profit that comes from the sale of the book, I call that take your spouse out to dinner money. So it's good money, if you multiply the number of copies sold for our bestseller. I mean, you made $7.5 million off of book sales alone. That's a nice chunk of change. But we don't look at that as the actual revenue source, regardless. The revenue source is the business that your book generates. So So we look at the book as a marketing arm. It's part of the marketing budget of your company. Can you make your money back? Absolutely. Can you make quite a bit of money from book sales? Absolutely. But we always look at it from the lens first of a marketing proposition, and then we look at it as potential revenue.
We have a few minutes left here, Annalisa. We're talking with Annalisa Parent. She's a chief executive of Laurel Elite Books. Annalisa, what would you tell potential clients about your business and about how they should think about writing a book?
Well, I think that a book, as I said, is client conversation. And that word can't be overestimated. It's a conversation. So it's not a person behind a lectern speaking at people. It's a conversation. The reader is a part of that dialogue. And that's really important. And that gets into questions of audience and tone. You know, we don't want to be like hanging out in our pajamas on the sofa, casual in the way that we write our books, but we do want to, address the reader as a person, as someone who has thoughts and feelings and needs this solution that we're offering in the book. So having that conversation and keeping the reader in mind is really important.
That's good advice. You know, a lot of people start books. I know throughout my life, it's amazing the number of people said, well, I started to write a book. How did, and your answer is basically you have the people that can finish the book. Am I correct in that?
Yeah. And, that 8-week window is really important because, deadlines help. If I said 8 months, you'd say, I have plenty of time to write that book. If I say 8 weeks, that's a sprint, right? And it's not just that. It's not the deadlines and the accountability around that. There's an emotional piece to writing a book. And even if you're just writing a book about your expertise and it's your business and it's not really personal, it's still really personal. People have hang-ups from when they were in school, things their parents or grandparents or uncles said to them about writing itself. There's an emotional moment for every writer that I've ever worked with. And it tends, especially for business owners, it tends to sneak up on them and surprise them and come from a place, we're talking about like client engagement and the chapter on client engagement or something. And suddenly there's an emotional moment. They're stuck. There's a writer's block. There's something happens. And being able to be honest about that, to talk about the fact that writing is an intimate act regardless of the subject matter, I attribute our success with authors to the fact that we're working through deliberately those issues that come up for these writers.
Annalisa Parent, I could go on for hours with you. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. Having been a writer all my life, I've always held books in great esteem, and this Recalculating.biz has brought an awful lot of these entrepreneurs on over time, and I'm always fascinated by why they write a book, how they write a book, and the book that finally comes out. I'll have to invite you back sometime to talk more.
I would love that, Don. Thank you so much for this engaging conversation about something we're both really passionate about.
We are. But before you go, your website again for people and how they can reach you?
Absolutely. It's laurelelite.com, and they can schedule a free business scaling conversation with me right from that website.
Annalisa Parent, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. This has been a pleasure.
Welcome back to Recalculating, the program dedicated to American small business.
My co-host, Dan Perkins, is on assignment, but we have with us today Mark Moyer. He's a business growth strategist, and he's here to talk about ways to grow your small business. Mark, welcome to the program.
Hello, Don. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Mark, tell us a little bit about your background.
Absolutely. The short version, I always say there's no such thing as a short version, but I spent the bulk of my career has been helping companies hire the right people as an executive recruiter. And as time went on, I realized that actually individuals, especially entrepreneurs and executives, needed some advice on how to grow their careers and their businesses. And about 10 years or so ago, I started my own firm where I've been coaching entrepreneurs and business owners into how to really not just grow their business, but how to be seen in a more positive light and how to increase their visibility and traction in the marketplace.
Well, we're in an expanding economy. We're in a time where prior to the election of President Trump, whatever you think about him, we were in a period of stagnant growth. Now we're in a period of large growth. I just saw across my desk today that there were 7 million job openings in the United States today. Hasn't been that many for 40 years. Anyway, but it still takes a lot to grow a business. What are some of the things you've learned that you would like to impart to our audience?
Well, one thing I see in this market especially is that many entrepreneurs have wonderful ideas, and they try to get a company started. They bootstrap it sometimes, or they get investors, and then they try to bring in some people to get it up and running. What they lack in oftentimes is execution, because they're so focused on their own idea and how to get their own message out that they don't necessarily focus on, well, what does the audience really want? What does the potential customer or client really want or need? And how can they address that need? How can they scratch that itch? How can they be the cure to their common cold? And one of the things that I like to always talk about is 24/7, always put yourself in the eyes and the mind and the shoes of the person you are trying to interact with or you are interacting with, and try to anticipate what is it that's going to compel them to want to either do business with you or listen to you or get to your desired outcome.
That's good advice. I see a lot of times entrepreneurs who are on this program or we talk with, that they seem to be in love with their product more than with their customer. What do you say to that?
I say that you are 100% correct. A majority of the people I speak with fall into that category. They are so convinced that their product is the answer, but they don't actually find out, well, what's the question that they're answering? Who is it that's out there that really needs that product? And I think sometimes, whether it's a product or service, there's so much of a focus of trying to please everybody. And, in my opinion, you need to start with a fairly narrow niche and really try to establish credibility and excellence in that niche, and then you can grow from there. And I think sometimes people have more of a shotgun approach instead of a rifle approach.
I couldn't agree with you more. But, that's one thing. I'm going to, since we have a little time, give us another suggestion you have when you're coaching small business owners.
Well, I've got a few. One of them is, one thing I like to ask people to do is to effectively try to survey their audience. And I don't necessarily mean by sending, here's a survey, please answer these questions, but maybe more so it can be whether it's a direct email to your potential client base where you're simply asking, if I was to do blank, is this something you would have an interest in? Or if I was to do one of the following 4 things going forward, which would interest you the most? And what you find is that when you ask people, when you're putting your potential product out there, but you're asking them about the different types of service or product you're going to offer, a lot of times you'll be absolutely surprised at what you find out when the results come back in. And that happens quite frequently with my clients, where they are absolutely shocked to see that a big percentage of people are actually leaning much more one direction than expected. And one of the other things I really like to talk about is that this is all, when you have a new business and a new venture, you have to really be malleable. You have to really learn to have a Teflon skin and almost go with the flow. And it's happened in my own business where originally I was focusing almost all of my time on helping people with their careers and guiding them from conceptually the couch to the boardroom. And as much as I've enjoyed that and it's been great, I've also realized that I've evolved much more towards business coaching and helping people's businesses, and not just getting them up and running, but really sustaining them. And that's the big thing. It's one thing to get them up and running. It's another thing to have sustained growth. And that's something that I've transitioned. So I think to me it's really important for a new business or a new an entrepreneur to be flexible with their end game.
Well, we're talking with Mark Moyer. Mark, what's your website for our audience?
It's a pretty easy one, markmoyer.com.
Spell it out. This is radio.
Sure, markmoyer.com. And a funny story about that is that when I tried to get that website initially, I found out that somebody else owned it. And I said, well, how is that possible that somebody else would own this website? Turns out there was another Mark Moyer out in Phoenix, Arizona, who just bought it many, many years ago and said, oh, someday I'm going to have a blog. So we ended up basically negotiating over the ability to have that website. So I finally got a hold of it 3 or 4 years ago, and so that's where all of my information resides. I've got information about my coaching services, my podcast, my book, a variety of things. So it's a great resource.
And your book, what's the name of it?
The book is called Win Again, and I wrote Win Again, just released it several months ago. It's basically a job search playbook helping athletes transition into the workforce. Because one of the people that I'd been coaching was a retired hockey player and a professional hockey player, and he really struggled with leaving the game and making that transition into what he was going to do post-career. And when I spoke to him, he had already been out 10 years, and he had been day trading basically for the past 7 years. And he was at home with his wife, his kids, and he was demoralized and depressed and really didn't know what he was going to do with the rest of his life and his career, and he was still young. And once we started chatting, and I encouraged him to, become a better networker, but to also be on LinkedIn and to start reaching out to people and start making more connections. And then from there, leverage those connections into meetings that eventually led to a couple of interviews and an offer. And he went from our first conversation to 5 weeks later having an offer at a financial services firm that he accepted. And he was amazed at the speed. And I said, when you do things a certain way and you tie in a lot of networking and being proactive in your job search, things can happen very quickly. And he said to me, Mark, you need to really focus on athletes because they really, really struggle when they leave the game. And, I mean, we're not talking about Derek Jeter or Magic Johnson, but more so the 90% of other athletes that may make a fair amount of money at one point, but it goes away. And they're left, and they retire at a young age, in their 20s, maybe 30s. So I wrote the book with the idea of helping these athletes make that transition because, for one, I went onto Amazon and I noticed that there were no books written at all about helping athletes make that transition. There were a couple of books written about, the Fran Tarkenton story, how I, went from here to running, doing real estate. And then there was the John Elway story and how he left the game and opened up a bunch of car dealerships. But there weren't any written by career experts on how to get the athletes to use their skill set, capabilities, and what they've been trained in, and leveraging that into a career. So it's a book that's basically thousands of dollars of coaching in a $20 book is what I tell people, and it's actionable tips and strategies that you can immediately use. And I find that a lot of the books that are out there today, they lack actual stuff you can use right away. It's usually an upsell to their coaching or their conferences and whatnot. But I decided I wanted my book to be helpful from the first page on.
The name of the book again?
Is Win Again. Win Again.
Okay. We're talking with Mark Moyer. His website is markmoyer.com. But now, Mark, you said something interesting. You said you ought to be flexible. Yet, if you look at many of these stories of successful entrepreneurs, it's they did it their way. Steve Jobs being one. He clearly did it his way. But you're saying that you have to be flexible. How do you reconcile those two thoughts?
Well, my guess is that Steve Jobs at some point along the way received feedback from potential customers suggesting that maybe the keyboard should look a little bit more like this than like that, and or that when it came time to develop an iPhone, he was originally going to have a round one, and it turned out to rectangle. I'm not sure, but I think what happens is that as much as we may think as entrepreneurs that we have brilliant ideas that have never been thought of before, which is always untrue. Everything seems to have been thought of. It's just a question of actually executing on it. But I think that what happens is that the ones that tend to suffer are the ones that push a product so hard without really looking at what the client or the potential customer needs and wants and what's going to really create market share. And so you need to be flexible in that if something is not working, you need to pivot. If you don't pivot, you're toast. That's the way it goes.
You know, it's interesting. Just today, a company went belly up. What it did is provided kitchens where food entrepreneurs could develop their products and create batch runs, etc. And they just went belly up. They closed the doors quite suddenly. But and what happened was that the two founders stuck to their model too long rather than make the adjustments that everybody said was necessary. So there's a verification of what you're saying. But it's often difficult to get an entrepreneur to change. How do you get them to change?
Well, I think it's important to reverse engineer the process a little bit and to ask them, well, where do you really want this to go? What's the end game or the next level? Are you trying to do this so that another company can swoop in 3 or 4 years and buy you? Are you looking to do this to basically run it the rest of your life and your career? Is this just a hobby for you? What is the actual goal here? But start with the vision 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road. Are you thinking about, 10 years from now, is your yacht going to be named after your company? Or is it going to be where you're in a basement somewhere still grinding away? Well, you don't have that vision. You'd probably rather the yacht vision. Well, how do you get to that point? Well, go backwards from there and really try to think, well, how do I get there? What are the steps necessary to get there? But if you go backwards from there, I think you'll find out that you may say, well, look, if your audience, if your customer base is telling you that, triangle lampshades are not the answer to put on top of this halogen light, you need to have circular ones, well, then you're going to need to learn to pivot. And I think that when you put it in the way that it's not a bad idea what they're doing, but if the audience suggests something else, then they're going to be more attuned to making that transition. I think that, yes, we can be very stubborn at times, entrepreneurs and small business owners, and we often think that our way is the right way, but the landscape is littered with people that have stuck to their guns, as you said, and it's, I think there's enough evidence out there that shows that if you pivot, you'll make it much bigger than if you don't.
You said you have several others. Let's go and give us another example of what you recommend.
Well, I think one of the critical things to do when you're running a business is to surround yourself with, people have often said it's important to surround yourself with smarter people. And I don't really know necessarily what constitutes smarter, but I think it's important to have other people that are experts at what they're experts at, to have access to people like that. And to this way, for example, if I want a greater presence on social media, I know I'm not the right person for that. So what I've done is I've gone out and found someone else and she's absolutely amazing and knows how to do all kinds of social media outreach and content, etc. If I want to hire someone to run my podcast, I've gone out and found someone who really knows how to do these things. He's an expert. I'm not. I can speak pretty well, so I can be a podcaster, but I can't possibly do that. For when I wrote the book, I know I'm a very good writer, but I'm not good enough to pull off the book myself, and I hired an editor to do that. So I think it's very important along the way to understand and realize that as smart as you may think you are, you're not the smartest, certainly at a lot of things that you need to have done. So that's a big, very important thing to do. It doesn't mean you need to hire a full team of people to surround you 24/7, but certainly understand that your time is best spent maximizing what you're very good at, and understand that other people are experts at other things, and delegating that to the experts. One thing.
True.
I'll follow up with
ahead.
that.
You're the guest.
Yeah, sure. There's one. There's a great book that I loved reading 3 or 4 years ago by a guy named Perry Marshall, and he's one of the one of the top business guys out there in terms of advice on how to be a top sales and marketer. And his book is called The 80-20 Sales and Marketing. It's a fascinating book that covers a wide range of topics on how to maximize, using the Pareto principle, which basically says the 80-20 rule is in effect almost everywhere, right? It's, 80% of your business comes from 20% of your clients. 80% of traffic goes on 20% of the road. There's all kinds of 80-20 rules everywhere. 80% of your email is garbage, right? Or much higher than that. But what he also talks about is within that 20%, the 80-20 rule applies in there, and he says, look, 64% of your success is going to come from 4% of your clients. So what he likes to talk about is really focusing, using a laser to focus in on those moments during the course of your day that you are actually maximizing your potential, your income potential, your business potential. So, for example, if I am making, for argument's sake, $1,000 in a day, well, it's likely that I'm making, let's say, $800 in the course of a 45-minute period because I'm closing a deal with something or other. But maybe there's 6 hours of my time that's really spent doing stuff that's only making me $5 or $10 an hour. It's just stuff to do that needs to support the business. And he talks about, look, shove all that other stuff to somebody else to do. They're going to be experts at it. They'll do it at a much more effective and efficient rate, and that frees up time for you to focus on that $800 45-minute segment and repeat those all day long. And that's going to increase your income potential dramatically and your business. That's one of many things he talks about, which I think it's one of my absolute favorite business books to read. It's one I highly recommend.
It's funny, that book gets more mentions on this show than any other book.
Interesting. Oh. Well, it's worth it,
Well, we can't get him to come on the show, but we sure plug his book.
Yeah, maybe if he knows how much his book is getting mentioned, we'll drag him in. I'll see if I can chase him down for you. It's. I'm sorry.
You first. No, you first. Go ahead.
Well, one of the things that I started almost jokingly to say I'll chase him down, but one of the things that I've found out with even a tool like LinkedIn, of all things, is that if you use that platform in a certain way, it's incredible the types of connections you can make with people and the level and the caliber of people that you can actually connect with and start doing business with. And I can safely say that in the past several months, I've made some incredible connections that led to other connections, led to others and to so many opportunities that never would have happened otherwise. And my feeling is that, without even knowing if Perry Marshall is on LinkedIn, but he might be kicking around on there somewhere, my feeling is that if, one thing that I've gotten very comfortable with is making introductions to other people and establishing much stronger networks, because to me, the root of all strong business comes from having a really rock-solid foundation and a strong network. And to develop a strong network, you need to be comfortable with how you expand that network. And to me, the vast majority of people hate the concept of networking. Their thought is that networking means you walk into a room full of strangers, you start shaking lots of hands, you pass out business cards, you've got name tags on, and you have awkward discussions about something. And to me, networking is something you can do sitting in your PJs behind your screen, where you can actually spend some time on LinkedIn connecting with people, as long as you have a specific message that you want to say, a personalized message that compels people to want to come back to you. And then you start a conversation and a discussion where at no point initially do you say what it is you're looking for, but instead you offer the other person your assistance, your help, your network, anything that they might find of value, and then you start the ball rolling. And that's created innumerable opportunities for me. And it's something that I find that the vast majority of the people that I coach really don't even scratch the surface of something that to me is very much low-hanging fruit.
You're absolutely right. We're talking with Mark Moyer. His website is markmoyer.com. Mark, we have a few minutes left. Can you give us another example of some of your suggestions? So far, you've batting 1,000, so keep going.
I guess I can't bat over 1,000, can I? But I'll try. One of the other things that I notice when I look at an entrepreneur's website or how they're trying to put themselves out there is they tend to say, here's what my company does, and we do this, and we do that, and we do all these different things, and this is what we're going to do for you, and that sort of thing. And what I find is that people will read all that stuff, but they'll say, well, I couldn't, so what? I couldn't care less. They're not really hitting a chord. And what I like to see instead, and I'll give you a quick example. I gave a speech recently, a couple weeks ago, to a healthcare provider, and their website is all about all the amazing things that their company has done since 1748 or whatever. And people reading that, I don't think they care. But instead, if they were to say right off the top of the thing, it said, "Have you ever had issues with healthcare? Have you ever struggled trying to find a doctor in your neighborhood? Have you ever been put on hold for many, many minutes with no results? If that's you, I'd love to talk to you, because we here at so-and-so company are changing all of that." Well, suddenly they're talking to me. They're resonating to me as the reader, and I'm thinking, you know what? For once, here's a company I'd love to talk to. And the same goes for a business owner. Instead of saying all the different things that you do, talk about how you're going to cure their illness, their itch, their issue, how you're going to solve their problem. So, for example, one of the people I'm helping out is actually a charity, and this charity basically brings kids out of the neighborhood, the bad neighborhoods, and onto a baseball diamond, and they basically provide baseball equipment and batting cages and all kinds of things. And I said, well, instead of talking about the charity and all these great things that you do, talk to the child, talk to the parent. Have you ever wished that your child, your son or daughter, could be on a baseball field instead of walking the streets in Philly or New York or wherever? Have you ever wanted to see the joy that they feel at the crack of the bat when they hit a home run? Donate to us and we'll put your child there, or take advantage of our charities, blah, 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 blah. But it's all about presenting it where you're solving their issues, but you first address their issues first. And when people do that, they see the engagement increase dramatically.
You're absolutely right on that point. Whenever I go to a show, I'm always surprised. Number one, you can never tell from the booth what the particular provider does, and two, they never ask you what you need. They're always talking about what they can do.
Absolutely.
I'm always surprised on it. Well, no longer surprised. And we talk about it. Let's talk about one other thing, follow-up, which is a favorite subject of mine. What do you tell people about follow-up?
Well, follow-up, what I tell them is it's absolutely critical and essential. I can't tell you how many people say to me, well, Mark, I sent an email last week and I haven't heard back. What should I do? And I say, well, email them again. What are you talking about? What do you do? Because I receive every day, 100, 200 emails. And if anybody sends me an email and I can't get to it right away, it goes all the way down my screen and it's gone. And I forget. But if somebody emails me again, I may have a much better chance, and even a third time. I'm not going to be upset with them that they're stalking me like that because, honestly, they're being persistent, and I appreciate that. However, I also counsel people to never say, oh, I guess you didn't see my email last week, blah, 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 whatever. Forget all that. Just simply send the exact same email again. It's okay. People get it, that everyone's busy. There's so much clutter in our inboxes. The same thing goes with a phone message. Keep at it. Be persistent. No one's going to be upset with you if you've done it 2 or 3 times. If you start emailing 6, 7, 8 times, maybe a different story. But everybody, whenever you're following up, that's essential. Now, one last thing. If you are simply saying, hey, I was wondering if you thought about what we talked about last week, well, maybe they didn't. Or maybe they did and they didn't really think much of it. So you can't really lead with that. What you need to do is say, oh, over the weekend I was on NewYorkTimes.com or CNN or, Fox News, and I saw a story about how so-and-so company is expanding into Eastern Europe. And I thought about you, and I was curious to know what your position is on that. Would love to catch up with you. Bring out something that's tied in with what they do for a living, some reason that connects why you'd be reaching out to them. Because then they'll say, oh, right, yeah, you know what, let's talk some more about that. But, it's interesting, in Eastern Europe, blah, 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 blah. And then let's definitely catch up this week. Let's have a coffee on Tuesday, etc. So whenever there's a follow-up opportunity, I always like to say, bring up something that ties in that person with what they do, and then they will figure out that they realize that they need to follow up with you otherwise.
What's your podcast all about?
So the podcast is called Make Your Mark, and I like to showcase and highlight people either in the sports industry or athletes, or I also interview veterans. But I like to talk to them about how they're using what they've learned as an athlete or in the sports industry or in the military, and they're using it for positive impact after they've left. So, for example, I've had a few athletes that have either set up charities or they've got other businesses that are doing good out there. I've spoken to a variety of media people that also were involved with sports, but now they're doing different things whether it's within the sports industry or outside of it. And the veterans that I've spoken with, one young lady, she's fabulous. Her name is Chelsea Mandello. She has started a company called Troopster, which basically it allows you to send a package to your loved one. If you've got son or daughter or whoever it is overseas, she takes care of all the mailing of everything, gets it there safe, versus sometimes you having to rely on the USPS or et cetera to get something there, and it may arrive damaged and so on in the middle of who knows where. It's a great I love what she's doing. So a lot of these stories really revolve around somebody that's making a great impact, a positive impact, and it's something I just started doing just a few months ago. But I love doing it. I get a chance to really shine a light on what other people are doing and not necessarily what I'm doing. But I really get a kick out of that, and it's really some impressive people. Most of them are not necessarily household names, but maybe they should be for what they're doing. And you can catch the podcast on any of the major, iTunes and Stitcher and YouTube and so forth. But it's called Make Your Mark.
With that, Mark, we have to call it. We've been talking with Mark Moyer, your website again for our listeners?
Is www.markmoyer, MERKMOYER.com.
Recalculating, a program designed to help you be successful.